Welcome to Take a Seat, where we sit down with experts on a wide range of topics related to the science of human flourishing. I'm your host, Dr. Nick Holton. I'm a coach, consultant, and speaker in the field of optimal human functioning. Whether you're someone trying to build your best self or a better community, we've got something for you, so take a seat. Hello, friends. Welcome back in to Take a Seat. I've got a really unique episode for you this week, one that really speaks to the importance and really, I think, profoundness of human resilience. We sat down with Mike Voron and Ali Lambert Voron, two incredibly resilient individuals who have really powerful stories, both on their own and as a married couple. We started by digging into Ali's story and specifically into the details of her challenges with alopecia and over a 3-year battle with ulcerative colitis, struggles she went through both as a teenager with her family and then later as an adult with Mike by her side. We then learned about Mike's history of overcoming adversity, including the loss of his mother to brain cancer, looking after a brother with a lot of challenges and special needs, and the recent realization that his father likely has Aspergers. Plus, how all of that has fueled his work as a principal at a school in Yonkers for kids with special learning needs, along with his work for the Special Olympics. The two weave in and out of some of the stories behind these challenging events in their lives, the lessons they've learned from these events, and they do so with a sense that they can really handle anything that comes their way because in the end, they really seem to always have one another to lean on. It was a really incredible conversation, and like many we've seen this season, one that I think really helps put a lot of things into perspective. So I hope you enjoy our conversation with Mike and Ali Voron. How you doing? Hi, Mike. Nice to meet you.
Hey, what's up, Nick? How are you, man?
Good, thanks. Good to be here with you both.
Thanks. Long time coming.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. Thanks for making it work. So I'm glad.
So if you look in the top of this Zoom, it's like a one of these things doesn't belong picture.
Yeah.
So this will be a bald cast.
Yeah. Pretty much. Or, yep. Love it. Great point. So
I'm a nervous wreck. Mike is like, couldn't be more relaxed.
Nothing to be nervous about. Point being is multiple people this morning have asked who we're interviewing for this episode now that it got released. And when I mentioned it, the people rave about you and your sisters, right? They mentioned the award. So like, I think people are excited to hear from you.
Oh, good.
You should feel excited. Maybe nerves come with that, but either way, I think this will be really good. Okay, cool. So, basically the idea is I thought we might just sort of start digging into each of your kind of individual stories respectively. And obviously those stories are going to merge at some point and we'll go down that road. But just kind of see what that elicits. And, I have a general sense that a lot of what we'll talk about today will be challenges faced and overcoming some of those challenges and strategies for doing so and those sorts of things, both individually and collectively. So let's start on the individual side. And Ali, let's start with you. Why don't you give us some of your background and your story, whatever that means to you.
Okay. So as it relates to Shipley, I went to Shipley since 3rd grade. So 3rd through 12th. And I have 2 younger sisters who both also went there. So we're a big Shipley family. And along the way, when I was 16, let me just say I was totally healthy my whole life. Like I barely even got a cold. I always used to think about like I'd never even missed school because I never was sick. And then when I was 16 years old, my mom noticed a bald patch on the top of my head and we didn't know what it was. And I'd never heard of anyone losing their hair for any reason. And it turned out that I had something called alopecia. And little by little, my hair started falling out, first on my head and then on the rest of my body, all over my body. And I was basically I think about 9 months it took, and I was fully bald by 9 months, I was fully bald. So this was in my junior year at Shipley. And, whenever I tell people what age I was when this happened, their first response is always like, oh my God, that must have been so awful. What a terrible age to have that happen. And in high school. And it was really somehow just not that terrible. Like, it just wasn't. I think between my parents, who were very positive, always kind of like, what can you do? Like, there's worse things. Let's just kind of push on and just get through this. And then the support of Shipley, truthfully, I mean, like, I tell everybody that my two influences were my parents and Shipley, about this, just because there was just so much support. You know, and through that whole year, Shipley, I don't know what the uniform code is now, but, you know, you couldn't wear a hat, you couldn't wear really a bandana, anything on your head. And at that point, when I started losing my hair, I needed to. So, you know, to cover up. So I had to get permission to do that. And then when everybody saw me wearing a hat, it was kind of like, what's going on with Ali? So the whole school knew as this was happening. And I just felt total support. And when I say that, I mean, you know, both being allowed to do things like that, which is gracious and awesome. But also, at one point, it was the end of my junior year, and Dr. Pilch, who was the headmaster at the time, called me into his office, and he said, you know, I just wanted to see what you thought about this, but we're about to have elections for all school president, and, you know, sometimes the staff and I discuss who might be good people, and we feel like with everything that you've gone through this year, you might be a good, you know, just a good representation of how to handle something when it's thrown at you. That might be a challenge. And we feel like because it's such a visual, you know, position to be in, and the school sees you do, you know, weekly assemblies and all of that stuff, they said, maybe you should think about running. Long story short, I ran for president. During our speeches, I made it funny about losing my hair and following in the footsteps of, you know, Mr. Clean. And so I became all school president. And then my whole senior year, what was so amazing about them giving me that opportunity is that each week I stood in front of Shipley, the high school, you know, the upper school, and then at some points the whole school, at some points alumni or parents. And I kind of told my story, or I talked about, you know, it wasn't about me and it was just about Shipley. I was just a leader at that point. But the whole thing was just this constant message to me that it's okay, no matter, you know, what happens to you. This one was only cosmetic, but no matter what happens to you, you know, don't let that get in your way. Don't let that stop you. You could still lead. You could still be a leader. You could still stand in front of the school and, you know, represent Shipley and help, you know, the rest of the kids get through their things. So I took that with me after I graduated. And I think it was just this message that stuck with me. Like, no matter what happens to you, you know, you can do with it what you want. You can crumble, or you can just kind of persevere and push on. And so that whole thing is like who I am, which came again, both from my parents pushing me to just kind of, you know, move on, but really from Shipley, which I think is just such a gift. So later in my life, 10 years later, I wound up getting diagnosed with ulcerative colitis, which is like inflammation in your colon and your large intestine. It wound up being pretty bad. I went through, what was it, almost 5 years?
Well, that was about
4 years?
3.5 years.
3.5 years. It felt like a century. But of being very, very sick, where just nothing would really get the inflammation to cease. Tried every medication, tried some trial medications, changed my diet, you know, everything. In the end, we just decided that a way to kind of get through that is to have your entire colon, your large intestine, removed.
The only cure really is to remove the diseased organ, you know, so all of the other pharmaceutical interventions are really just sort of treatments as opposed to a cure. And none of the treatments were working.
So, you know, what was interesting about having this, you know, this diagnosis and this health issue is that the first time I went through this, it was totally cosmetic. It was totally on the outside. Everybody could see it, you know, whether it was at Shipley or driving in my car or when I got to college or when I moved to New York. Like, I was bald. I chose not to wear a wig just because to me it was more me. And it was such a visual thing, but it didn't hurt in any way. You know, it didn't like hurt my body. And then with colitis, it was the complete opposite. Nobody knew that I was really suffering, but it was so physical. And I mean, it was I almost died a couple times. I had 2 blood transfusions. I got something called PCP pneumonia, which basically only happens to people that are totally immunocompromised, which I was at the time from different medications. Mike and I spent our first wedding anniversary in the hospital. So, it was just really tough. And I think the fact that then I had to go through something so painful, and then we got through it by having this surgery and, just feeling better. It took about a year to heal after that. And then, I was okay. Like, I was better. We went on to have 2 children after that. So the lesson that I feel like both Mike and I got from that was, personally for me, wow, I've been through this cosmetic thing that was so visible to other people. And then, wow, I've been through something that hurt so badly and affected our lives so much. If I can get through both of those things, I can get through anything, really. Like, I really feel that way. And so I've had other autoimmune diseases that have popped up since then. I have 4 right now, nothing so crazy, but nothing so major. But, it is what it is. This is life. We only get to live once. So I can either live it, in pain or in emotional pain, or I can just kind of move on and go along with life and try to deal with it. Sadly, with my couple of things that I have now, Mike has to hear about it all the time because he is my other half. So when my skin is hurting or whatever, Mike's
I don't
the
know
one
what
who
you're
knows.
talking about. I don't think I hear any of that.
Tune it out.
Yeah, selective hearing loss.
Yeah. So that's basically, I think my story. The only other thing I would say to present is, with COVID that we're in right now with this pandemic, I know obviously there was so much struggle for so many people on Earth. For some reason, kind of slowing down life and slowing down the rat race and just kind of like catching my breath with my family and being more with my family, not having to run the kids everywhere. I have found it to be just such a great reprieve. And I felt that from the beginning. And it made me notice, wow, like, I struggle with some anxiety. And I think a lot of my anxiety is from the rat race, from not having myself all together and having to get this place and bring that thing. I'm forgetful. So it just kind of made me realize, wow, if I slow down, if life was a little slower, I would probably be a little bit, I'd be a little bit more calm. So in a way, for a while, I was very afraid to go back to the reality of life. I think I'm still a little afraid of that because if life moves fast again, I don't know, am I going to be ready for it? Then at the same time, I'm trying to say to myself, let me take what I've learned from this period and, use it to my advantage and somehow, do what I need to do to try to stay calm and not anxious. 11 days ago, I started this yoga challenge. I haven't moved my body in years. And it's like a 20-minute yoga thing every day for 30 days. And today was day 11. And I just it's a little bit of me time that I haven't really had in a year and much longer than that. But I'm trying to do things that will keep me, that I can bring into post-COVID life just to feel, more centered and better.
Our head of school uses language a lot. Previous school I was at used similar language. Like, what are you taking with you? What are you leaving behind? And it seems that a lot of people have, been forced to really in some ways reflect on that throughout this past year. And certainly not that it's behind us, but with, vaccine getting rolled out more and more and more, and people starting to think about things slightly differently. I think a lot of folks are asking that very question. Like, okay, maybe I'm seeing a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel. What do I want to make sure I don't forget about this time period, right?
And almost to take that part of it, like this has been a gift in a way. COVID obviously is not a gift as a whole, but if you can take something from the experience, let that be the positive that you take.
I've got a bunch of questions and a bunch of things I'd love to tap into. Before we do that, I want to pop over to you, Mike, and ask if you do the same. Kind of give us your story and your background and what it is that you do now.
Sure. I grew up outside of Philadelphia, kind of Lafayette Hill, Conshohocken area. I went to Plymouth White Marsh High School, hence the, quote unquote, wrong side of the tracks to an extent. And in my memory, in the perception of my childhood, I had a very uneventful type of childhood and upbringing. But I think that when you look at it from an intellectual perspective, and just look at the facts of it, there certainly was a lot of things that maybe I'm blocking out. Maybe my perception has sort of protected me to an extent. But I grew up with two parents that loved us very much. And I have a younger brother who, at 3 years old, was diagnosed with epilepsy. And, that in and of itself isn't necessarily any kind of death sentence, or especially in today's world, any kind of major diagnosis. Still a lot of complications, but back in 1983, it certainly was not as understood. And it also turns out my brother has intellectual disability, bipolar disorder, diabetes, and some other physical disabilities. When we were growing up in the in the 80s, these types of diagnoses in kids were not necessarily as prevalent or as understood. Special education was far from where it is today, and so what we experienced as a family, is very, very different from how I think I remember it. My brother had a lot of behavioral challenges as a kid. There was extreme tantruming and, grand mal seizures where I was brought to a neighbor's house in the middle of the night repeatedly, for a long period of time. I remember my mom telling me I grew up in the crib with Dan Kozlov because, I was often brought over there as a toddler, because my brother was being brought to the hospital in the middle of the night. And it obviously required a lot of attention by my parents that maybe I wasn't aware of as a child. I grew up playing ice hockey, and it was a pretty consuming type of endeavor. It's a lot of weekends, and it's a lot of travel, and it's a lot of practice, and it's a lot of equipment. And I think it sort of sheltered me maybe to an extent from everything else going on, because I was busy with ice hockey. I was very fortunate that I grew up in this sort of little suburban townhouse neighborhood, and my four best friends also lived there, and we had a little crew, and we could ride our bikes to each other's houses. And between that and ice hockey, I had a really strong support system and social network that I really do think sort of isolated me and protected me to an extent from a lot of the challenges my parents had to deal with regarding my brother. There's a lot of other family dynamics involved, as all families have lots of odd dynamics, some of which you understand as you're growing up, some of which you don't understand until you can reflect as an adult. But my mom was an only child. I had two sisters who died very young before she was grown. They were older than her. So there was something there within my grandparents and my mom that I wasn't really maybe in tune with. And my dad, I think as an adult, I now realize, and I'll touch base on this at another point, but I think it's pretty safe to say that my dad has Aspergers. And so and his sister has bipolar. And so there wasn't a ton of family support available for my parents. And, we had our community, our little community who supported me, So, as we got through those early challenges, my family kind of became immersed in Special Olympics. My mom coached as long as I can remember. I started coaching when I was 12 or 13. Probably, if I could assume, in preparation for my bar mitzvah, it was like, you got to do your little service stuff and all that kind of stuff. Yep. So start coaching Special Olympics, Yep. So, but I did, and I loved it. I did swimming and basketball and track and field, and, it was with my brother and my family. And looking back, it was interesting because it was really just my brother, my mom, and I. My dad wasn't really involved.
It sounds like you have a clear sense as to why at this point.
I do. Yeah. It's become more and more clear by the day. Fortunately, very recently. Very recently.
Last year or two.
So, growing up, I didn't really, I don't think I was aware or acknowledged or really allowed some of these family dynamics and challenges to impact me. I mean, I really just kind of remember sneaking out of my house at 12 at night to go to parties in high school, with my friends, and, hockey tournaments and, concerts. And it wasn't until a little later in life that I really went through some more real significant challenges from my perspective. Went on to college, went to University of Delaware, had great friends there, wonderful time. Went on and got another degree at Westchester University down there in Pennsylvania to be a teacher, and went on to teach history. And then I wound up moving to Massachusetts, to the Boston area, and I realized that I really missed that Special Olympics part of my life. And so when I was up there, I was coaching hockey for this powerhouse Catholic school team, and up there, high school hockey, especially the Catholic school hockey, is really almost more important than the Bruins. And it was a real interesting thing for this sort of Jew from Philly to be coaching at this Catholic school in Boston. And I had kids on my team who never even met a Jew. So, it was interesting and an awesome experience up there. And while I was up there, I got a master's in special education and went on to run some therapeutic support programs up there. In the meantime, while up there, my brother was about 21 at the time. He had some real difficulties in the community, and that's what led to an eventual psychiatric hospitalization and subsequent diagnosis of bipolar disorder and diabetes simultaneously. So, it was real confusing because he didn't understand it. So he's having these sort of, real visceral emotional responses to things. Police had been involved, and, work issues ensued, social challenges. And it turned out that both the diabetes and the bipolar disorder were manifesting simultaneously. So it was really tough for me to be in Boston with my family in Philly and go through that. And we did. Shortly thereafter, I met Ali, and we can talk about that separately. The real challenges for me, kind of from, really how I perceive them. And then when Ali and I met, we talked about all these challenges we had growing up, but neither one of us at that point felt like we really had challenges. She had alopecia. I grew up with a brother with disabilities. It wasn't.
It was light.
Yeah,
yeah.
We both like to do good things in the world. I mean, that was sort of the common bond. But when Ali got sick, that was obviously, really earth-shattering. I recall it was around. We're not like practicing Jews, so I don't really even know what holiday it was. It was like Rosh Hashanah or some. Yeah. And I remember having to call Ali's mom and being like, "Di, I need you to get up here right now, because this isn't good." And I had to rush Ali to the hospital, to her doctor's office in the city. In the back of the car, she was like bleeding, hemorrhaging, and had to have blood transfusions. And they were like, if you didn't get here now, like, you would have been in an real emergency situation. Mm-hmm. And that started this 3.5-year challenge we had with Ali on prednisone daily. And that's like signing a deal with the devil, that medication. And, it got her feeling better, but also caused some real psychiatric challenges that we had to battle through. And it was right after we got married. And about 3 years into her being sick, I got a call from my parents one day, right after we booked. Well, it was not after we booked it, but we were preparing to leave to go out west on a trip to see fish in Telluride and do a whole, 2-3 week tour of the West Coast in that area, national parks. And I get a call from my parents that my mom had something going on with her brain. They were doing a lot more tests, but there were some concerning signs. And Turned out that she had a glioblastoma multiforme that was rapidly developing. And July 28th, I believe it was, of 2010, we got the call. And by late August, she had already had her first surgery and was in rehab. And from that point on, nothing ever really progressed positively. Mm-hmm. It was one complication after another. She became paralyzed from the waist down, essentially. And the tumor was not able to be removed fully. And you know, it causes all kinds of, you don't know how a brain tumor is going to affect somebody because you don't know what parts of the brain it's going to sort of infiltrate in. So for her, it was mobility, it was speech, it was memory, it was emotional dysregulation. I mean, she pretty much got every sort of, you know, impact from it that I think you can really have. And by January of 2011, she had passed away. So that was right in the throes of Ali's 3 years of being sick. And my mom was still sick. We canceled our trip. I actually wound up taking about 5 months off of work because Ali was too sick to travel back and forth to Philadelphia, where my parents were outside of Philadelphia. And, you know, my dad, in hindsight now, I understand why I needed to be as involved as I was, because he was not capable of actually managing this situation alone, especially there was the estate planning that had to happen, the doctor's appointments, the stuff that was related to my mom's employment. She was a guidance counselor for the city of Philadelphia, and my brother. And so I took off work. I was back and forth. Meanwhile, my brother never had the proper services to fully access what was available to him because my parents sort of didn't think about it in a bigger picture manner and, you know, just didn't really identify everything that they needed to. So I was literally sitting at the door of state representatives and state assembly people advocating to expedite the approval of services for my brother so that I could move him out of my parents' house for the first time at age 30. Mm-hmm. That way my mom could at least maybe see him and see who's caring for him and, you know, have some sense of comfort in that. So that was a full-time job in and of itself at that point, on top of trying to support Ali and taking care of Ali and then dealing with all the doctors and the finances and things like that. So that was, to me, like where my challenges in life really like were amplified, and everything sort of came together in a you know, I guess a detrimental way. I had very vivid memories of I took my mom to get her first radiation mask at Perelman Center in Philly, and it went horribly wrong, and she couldn't tolerate it. She's on a fentanyl lollipop and a mess and throwing up, and you know, I'm at the hospital with her, and I'm like, all right, I got to get my dad here. So I'm calling my dad. Dad, I need you to get down here. What? Dad, I need you to get down here. I'll call you back. I'm on the treadmill. And I'm like, no, Dad, and I'll call you back. And I call Ali. I'm like, I don't know what to do. My dad won't get down here. So she had to call my dad and be like, Denny, get off the treadmill and get down there now. Well, my dad's routine was to be on the treadmill, and he couldn't break that routine. Yeah. I didn't know that at the time, right, and what was happening. Right. And so there were a lot of moments like that in that time period. And I didn't understand it, and nor could I process it. You know, my head was deep in the sand dealing with all of the details. And so we got through that, and Ali, you know, wound up getting her colon removed about 2 weeks before my mom passed away. Had to sort of be wheeled into the funeral, I believe, which was standing room only. My mom was an icon of the Special Olympics world in the area. I think there were like 600, 700 people at the funeral. And she had then been posthumously inducted into the Pennsylvania Special Olympics Hall of Fame as a coach, which my dad, brother, and I accepted in her honor. And the challenges then just continued. So after my mom's funeral, we kind of like had a few months of like recovery and breathing. And so in April of that year, 2011, Ali had her colon resectioned. So they took the external colostomy bag off and resectioned it, which is like Frankenstein medicine to me. A lot of complications in the hospital. She was in the hospital for almost 2 weeks from that. Real scary situations. And shortly after she got out of the hospital, my dad's sister lost her husband unexpectedly. He died of a heart attack in the middle of the night. My cousin tried to do CPR in the middle of the night. It was a real traumatic situation. He was a TV personality, so the whole situation was a bit of a media circus to an extent. And you know, that also obviously created a lot of trauma for everybody. And then a few months after that, their mom died, my grandmother. So it was a really, really dark, challenging time when we were going through all of that. And once that happened, that's when life started. After my grandmother died, things started to then, you know, plateau a little bit, or the negativity started to alleviate, and we got back to life. And you know, it's been over the last 10 years, I've had this reckoning regarding my dad, and maybe looking back, my dad suffered from a lot of depression, you know, a lot of challenges related to the Aspergers not being addressed as a child. I think he's communicated some real challenges with self-esteem to me, you know, as an adult, and, you know, just self-conscious over possible learning disabilities and all kinds of things, guilt over my brother's challenges. And so I kind of had to like take this sort of like pseudo patriarchal role in my family that, you know, is not ideal, but is what it is, you know? And so I don't know. I feel just, I leave all that kind of like Ali, like I live this great life, man. We live in a beautiful community, you know, in a beautiful part of the country with beautiful kids, awesome lives, you know, outside of all of these challenges. And so, you know, it's been quite a journey. And currently what I'm doing now is I'm a principal of a high school in Yonkers, New York. And our school is a public school, but it serves all kids with special needs. No surprise there, right? Our kids all have learning disabilities and an emotional disability. We're 100% free and reduced lunch. Our kids come from real socioeconomically challenged communities, majority minority student staff population, real underprivileged, underserved, underrepresented, systemic failures throughout their life experiences. And I have the privilege of being the leader of this school that has a singular mission of helping these kids realize that they can change the narrative of their future, and that they do not need to be a product of their environment and their previous experiences. They can control and determine what their future is going to be. And, you know, that's a pretty powerful, not from a power context, but a emotionally powerful position to be in.
First, thank you both for sharing all of that. I don't mean to quip about it, but I'm almost exhausted just hearing the trajectory, right? I can only imagine, truly can only imagine what it was like to live that. A lot of different directions I'd love to sort of go, threads to pull on, that sort of thing. I thought we would start here. It's interesting. Been thinking about it throughout, you both sharing your individual stories. Paul Wong is a psychologist out in Taiwan, and we've been going back and forth a little bit via email. And the reason for that is there's, I think, has been and continues to be an increasing amount of research and theory that suggests one of the ways in which we really need to think about getting to flourishing individually and specifically is through a developed ability to kind of overcome suffering and endure it. And that's all I could think about as you were walking through some of your experiences. And then when you get to the end and you talk about the framing you're putting around your life now, right? Sort of the relative perspective that's been generated as a result of your many individual and collective experiences, it certainly would seem to lend some credence to his sort of argument around that, what he calls existential positive psychology. I don't know if you care to comment on that at all. Do you would you kind of agree with his general hypothesis? Do you think, the language a lot of people would recognize is like post-traumatic growth?
100%. I mean,
Yeah, it's interesting. I've actually recently, I think it was maybe last week, somebody brought up Paul Wong.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
that's crazy.
That's wild.
So we do a lot of work in our school with social emotional learning. I mean, we're a therapeutic school, so we talk a lot about the research regarding growth mindset, and Carol Dweck, Brene Brown, and her research on trauma and shame. And it's interesting. I think the Paul Wong perspective is almost sort of like the Buddhist perspective.
It's very influenced by Buddhist philosophy.
Yeah, right. It's sort of the growth of suffering. That's a very Eastern type of approach to this notion that you grow through perseverance. Or the Western perspective of it is sort of based on positivity, right? And the more you're able to express and understand gratitude, selflessness, positivity, you literally can regenerate, some neurons, and there's actual physical growth that then can help you to persevere and create new directions and opportunities and pathways to grow and develop. And so a lot of the work we do in our school, I mean, every Tuesday we have Gratitude Tuesday at 1:50, where we talk to our kids and our staff about how you express gratitude, why, for what reasons, to whom. We do Mindful Mondays and Freedom Fridays, and it's all about this concept of growing through trauma and processing that. And so it's interesting that was the context that Wong came up. It kind of comparing and contrasting the approaches.
Yeah. Well, and that's really, the first two things I was kind of putting down in my notes here is you both were talking that both seem to be really present in your stories, in your histories, and that, I don't mean to be overly romantic about it, but in some ways it seems like your early life experiences really prepared you to be with one another when you eventually met, right? Like you were both
100%.
both prepared to endure some real challenges with and for one another, in part because of practice you had received consciously or sort of subconsciously, it sounds like in some cases. And I think that, there's a real nice beauty to that, which it looks like, just judging by your faces, you both feel and agree with as well. But of course, like that's not necessarily the same thing as wishing for those experiences to occur. What you're talking about is really growing, enduring, silver lining, getting some perspective, right? But ultimately still layering in the deliberate cultivation of pleasant emotion, which can serve as an antidote to some of those things. You mentioned humor, love, social support, belonging, those sorts of things, right? It just occurs to me that it doesn't seem like an either or proposition. There's really kind of a both and. Yeah, there's a place for the lessons that can be learned and the way life can be enhanced through some suffering.
Even how I started out talking about COVID. That's exactly what I was kind of finishing up with, because that's how I get through things, is to kind of then what can I take from this? How can I frame it in a positive way? We have 2 kids. How can we help frame it for them? And it's not to ignore, I still think you need to process and feel the feelings of negativity, or, to quote unquote mourn, my colon or my hair, or anything that you're going through, whether it be physical, parents getting a divorce, having trouble in school, any kind of challenge. Just jumping over to another thought I just had when you were talking right before that was, one thing I always say to people, or I should just say, when I was really sick, where I was anemic, my face was very pale, I was either very skinny or my face was blown up a bit from prednisone. Physically, it didn't look like me. I didn't even really recognize myself. It was a slow process, but I remember my mom saying to me, make sure, number one, you're comfortable every day. So get some new comfy clothes, make sure you have a really comfy sweatshirt, comfy sweatpants, whatever it is. But also just don't make it be black or gray. Pick up a color that when you look down or when you look in the mirror, it kind of gives you a little like, okay, I see like happiness. And
smart mom.
yeah. And I did that every day. And, same thing with, I always wear eye makeup because I don't have eyelashes and eyebrows. And to me, that's kind of how I, like the way I look better. That way I feel more quote unquote normal. So even when I was like on death's door, not really, but even when I was very sick, I made sure I put on my eyeliner, I put on a little blush just to give my face a little, and it wasn't for anybody else, but for me. When I looked in the mirror, if I saw a drawn white, blown up face, that was not going to be good for my mentality that day. But if I looked in the mirror and, saw a little bit of color, I felt like it helped me. So that was almost like my internal cheerleader, helping me get through whatever struggle it was. So I have a friend who was just diagnosed with cancer, and I slipped in at the right time. Make sure you have like a nice comfy sweatsuit and like, don't, if you like, makeup, put on a little blush, just because to me that really made a difference. And it's such a small, almost silly thing, but it helps, so finding ways that you can help yourself to me is a huge thing.
All of that really speaks to that both and when we talk about like the language we use is cognitive framing. So, we put our brains in an fMRI machine, like adrenaline and fear and anxiety and excitement. They're going to show up with really similar signatures, right? What's going to change sort of how they impact us? Well, oftentimes it's how we think about things. And that's what I just hear so much of in your stories is, okay, yeah, I've got to think about this in a way because these things are truly dangerous. They're truly difficult. I need to bring them in. I need to understand them. I need to process them. I need to kind of make sense of how to move forward with them, right? And at the same time, I'm not losing sight of some things that can nurture me and that I can be grateful for. In fact, in many cases, it sounds like that process of enduring significant unpleasantness and flat out danger enhances the level of clarity you have around some of those things that you're grateful for. Would you say that tends to be the case?
Yeah, I'll give you a very simple analogy or example, I should say. One of the occasions Ali was hospitalized.
I was going to say the same thing.
One of the occasions Ali was hospitalized was during the football playoffs, and I'm like most Philadelphians, a big Eagles fan. And
I was going to say the party we had in the hospital.
Oh, right. I forgot about that.
Yeah,
well, I want to hear both then. Let's hear both. Mike first, and then Ali can tell the party.
Well, I'll tell you, we, on our first wedding anniversary, we were very fortunate that we had some savings when Ali got sick because of her ridiculous voiceover career, really.
At that time.
And, we stayed in a really nice part of Mount Sinai Hospital where there was a chef from the Four Seasons who would prepare dinner if you wanted. So we had like a whole, it was like you're at a hotel, we had like, I don't even know what you could eat. I don't even remember, but we pretended like everything was fine. And we had like room service delivered, right?
Yeah.
We did have a party. Ali can comment on that if you even
Pizza
remember.
party, wine, beer.
Yeah, I mean,
we had like 15 friends in my hospital room. Like
there was like a big, there was like like an entertainment space on this floor at the hospital that you could utilize.
They let us use that room.
Right. Well, I worked from there.
Oh yeah, but that's
but back, yeah. So the Eagles were playing. I'm pretty positive it was the Arizona Cardinals, and in a playoff game, and Ali's doctor, her GI, happened to be there, and we were pretty friendly with him. I would text him, and we were on a first name basis. And so he and I had some chicken wings and drank some beers in the hospital room watching the Eagles playoff game. Ali just laying there sick. I don't know what she was doing at the time, but I was watching the game. But since then, my sort of like fanaticism for the Eagles and my real like typically Philadelphia live and die and mood swings by how the Eagles are performing almost completely dissipated. Like, I love the Eagles. I watch football. I watch hockey. I love sports. But like, I don't have that sort of like, if they lose today, I'm going to be in a bad mood all day. That all sort of went away from that experience.
Because it put it in perspective.
Yeah, it just gave it this perspective of,
you're watching the game and I'm in a hospital.
Right. I'm drinking a beer in a hospital room with my wife who almost died.
And a GI.
And a doctor. This game isn't that important.
Yeah, sure. And hearing about that and about the pizza party, the other note I had written down is, it sounds like, you correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like you would say that one of the takeaways from sort of overcoming struggles of various degrees of seriousness and various levels of trauma and intensity levels is who's around you, social support.
Yes.
Each other.
Absolutely.
But I'm hearing about friends and doctors and figures. Would you both, maybe wax poetic a little bit about the impact these other people in your life have had on your ability to fight through these really incredible experiences?
Without a doubt, I can start with, I completely agree with what you're saying. Friends, family, teachers, friends through Facebook now more as we're older, even that current support system through COVID, that's kind of been a little bit more of my community. Thank you, Mike. But, when I lost my hair, the support that I had from my family, I already mentioned my parents, was, unwavering and really pushed me to kind of see the positive in it and motivate, get through. But I was 16. My youngest sister was, Jill was 9. And at one point when I was just kind of in the beginning of losing my hair, I had to go to the doctor and lie on a table. And I don't know if I had like 6 or 8 bald patches, but they had to inject each patch with like 15, injections. And for some reason, one day, I don't know if my parents couldn't go with me. I was a driver at this point, so I could go by myself. But my sister Jill, who was 9, said, "Can I go with Ali? I wanna be with her." And so I only had to do that a couple of times. It wasn't my first time, but I lied down on the table, and Jill asked if she could lie next to me, and the two of us lied there while I got these injections. And I don't even need to say anything else. The support was just so unbelievable. My sisters have always been like that. We had great friends when Mike's mom was going through her struggles and mine. And I just can't say enough about support. I do say I remember that when I was sick with colitis, there was a point where like every day I could have complained 100,000 times. So I would keep it to myself, or Mike got a lot of that. And then I would notice that, my friend Cindy was hearing it every day. And then I'd feel like, oh, I can't call my mom again because she's been hearing it so much. And I started to feel like if I keep, venting to the same people, to me, when I was sick, and I'm sure this wasn't actually the case, but I just felt like they're just not going to want to pick up the phone anymore. So I kind of, in a weird way, found some almost, I don't want to say second level, relationships, but like I wound up venting to people that I almost wouldn't have expected. And people always seemed to be there for me because, they wanted to support and listen. And to me, it felt good to not have to quote unquote bother, the same old people, but I found some new people. And I remember when Mike's mom was sick and he was going to Philly, you had like beers with people that you hadn't talked to in a long time. And, people just kind of came out of the woodwork and helped. And I remember that with funerals and with surgeries. It's like, you don't really know who the expected people, hopefully are there, but sometimes surprises come out of the woodwork. And that's really special too. And even as not the victim, but the supporter, sometimes I think about that when I hear of other friends or family going through a struggle, and I pop in and say, I know we're not that close, but if you ever want to go, for a walk or whatever it is, I think it's nice to be there for other people, even maybe not your closest.
Good for them and good for them and good for us.
Yes, exactly.
I think
True.
that one of the things that we take for granted with this, maybe you more than me, I don't know. For me anyway, probably more than Ali, like music is my religion. Right? Mm-hmm. Positivity is my spirituality. Concerts are my church. Mm-hmm. And so when Ali was sick, right, that New Year's of 2010 into 11, we went to see Fish at Madison Square Garden. That was a great place to be for New Year's because we were with these people that we had been seeing a lot of music with, in this really wonderfully positive environment. that kind of is that support system that Ali was referring to was really developed through that world we live in. We met in New Orleans at Jazz Fest through mutual friends.
Cool.
Yeah, at the House of Blues at 2 a.m.
Yes.
for a concert from a guy named Carl Denson, awesome funk band from California, and he'd been always playing the second Thursday late night show at the House of Blues, the second weekend of Jazz Fest. And it's sort of people develop their rituals, right? And that's a show that I had been to several years in a row.
Me too.
Ali also, when we had met through mutual friends, and we really kind of, I think we both would agree, we sort of like fell in love without even talking while in the show, and spent the rest of the weekend together. And you know, we were with all these mutual friends, and we've made lots and lots of friends since then. And that's kind of like what I do to reset myself. The pandemic has been the most difficult part of the pandemic for me, is that I can't see live music. And it actually, I feel it in my soul. I can feel a depletion from it.
It's almost like if you couldn't exercise or something. It's like you're missing your
And
therapeutic.
You mentioned
absolutely.
Brene Brown earlier. I think she would call some of what you're describing a quote unquote collective moment, right? There's collective moments of joy, collective
1000%.
moments of sorrow, and these tend to be experiences in which we're sort of sharing an emotion with the people around us. So you mentioned concerts, like everybody kind of knows you go to a concert, there's at least a song at some point where the artist stops singing and allows the crowd to take over, and you get that little jump in your belly and those sorts of things, right? Those are the sorts of experiences. And I think there's, you know, pretty convincing evidence that suggests that those sorts of experiences really bind you or can bind you in any way.
Yeah, well, in the music that we listen to and the scene that we're in, that's the way it is from the start of the show to the end of the show, before and after the show. It's a collective moment from start to finish, not just in those moments when the artist stops singing, but it's truly, you know, from the time you get in your cars with friends to get to the parking lot, walking into the show, every moment of it is this sort of real, true collective moment of like joy and positivity and excitement, and you know, that we thrive in that. I mean, I literally believe, you know, I'll interject, you know, when Ali was sick, I started seeing a therapist to help obviously get me through some of that. And when my mom got diagnosed, I went to the therapist, and his name was Ari, and I told him, and, you know, he's like, holy cow, like, I can't believe you have to deal with this now. This is unbelievable. And he said to me, all right, well, like, you know, what are your religious views? And I'm like, well, I was raised Jewish, but I'm really, I don't necessarily believe in organized religion. And he said, well, what do you believe in? And I thought for a couple of seconds, and I said, I believe in positivity. I believe that we're obligated to leave a positive footprint behind and produce as much positive energy as we can in the world. And he said, all right, well, this is my advice to you. When you go to bed every night and put your head down on the pillow, if you have a real good night's sleep, no matter what's going on around you in your life, if you have a good night's sleep, you were making decisions that were in line with your core values and beliefs, despite the circumstances. If you have a restless night of sleep, you might want to reflect on the previous day and think about where you may have operated outside of your core values and beliefs, and either just own that and understand it, correct those issues, make adjustments from, what you reflected on and learned. And if you do that, you will be all right. And I think that since that day, I've lived every day like that. I've shared that advice that Ari gave me. I would venture to say
hundreds,
maybe thousands of times. I mean, I don't anymore, but I had been doing a bit of public speaking, at conferences and other events as it relates to special education, et cetera, and our other adventures that Ali and I had. I think that reflection and recognition of the alignment of our core values and beliefs as a human are, really critical to getting through these types of situations. You know, that to me, that notion that my core value is to leave a positive footprint in the world behind me, as I move forward, is really, I feel, why we've been able, or I've been able to anyway, talking more individually, why I've been able to persevere.
That's a tool in your toolbox. So I want to take this in a related, although slightly different direction. You're talking about, you know, concerts and the parties and social support, and, you know, that's a collective thing. And at the same time, it's very good for your individual self, right? And it occurs to me that sort of relationship where, you know, the collective experiences can positively impact individual well-being. Well, that can happen in the other direction as well, where being maybe a little overly focused or impacted by, you know, other people's experiences around you can have a detrimental effect, right? And certainly there must have been moments where, for you both, it was probably really challenging, I would guess, to make sure you also focus on self-care. Right. So I'm wondering, like, were you both very intentional at different periods about making, you know, Al, you mentioned yoga right now, but, you know, did you have steps, strategies that you employed to try to help, you know, maintain some of your sanity and equilibrium in some of these very, very arduous experiences?
So one thing that I don't know if I needed to do it or wanted to do it, but when I was sick, I took a bath every single day. I remember lighting candles. I remember spending a lot of time in the bath. And since then, you know, I take baths more when I'm, you know, with the kids, or I was never really like a big bather. I mean, only as a kid, but.
She stunk when we met.
Oh. I was never a big baby. I didn't really like to keep myself clean.
Weren't you? Yeah, you were in New Orleans at a jazz concert. Yeah, it's just supposed to stink.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, this is as clean as I've ever been in my life. I mean, if Ali met me a couple years earlier than we met, she wouldn't have never made eye contact.
But anyway, you know, I think that I couldn't really do much at that point, and that was, you know, 10 feet from my bed. And it was cozy and it was safe, and it was something that somehow brought me some peace and calm and comfort physically, mentally. And, you know, I couldn't do yoga at that point. Like, I was just kind of too sick, but I did find that. And I don't think it was, I don't know if it was on purpose or not, but there was a point where I realized, wow, I need this. You know, I like this. And so it's funny, when I started the yoga 10 days ago, you know, my body was hurting for the first time in a while in a good way. And I said to Mike, I think I'm going to take a bath, which I have taken baths with the kids, but by myself, it had been years. And so I just sat in the bath and I was thinking about, wow, the last time I really did this was when I was kind of dealing with so much negative stuff. And it brought me, you know, positive happiness and calm again. And I've done it, I think, 2 or 3 times since. So that was something that I did when I was really unable to do much else.
Love it. I mean, that's probably the hard part, right? Is you're so focused on taking care of others. I think it's really easy to lose track of taking, you know, it's put your oxygen mask on before you place it on somebody else, right?
Absolutely. Also, I mean, I don't know how I forgot this, but I was seeing a therapist when I was sick, I think at one point twice a week, just to sit on her couch and just kind of, you know, vomit out everything that had happened in the previous 3 days. And as I said, you know, I had Mike, I had my family, I had friends, I had that second layer of friends to go to. But there was just a point where it almost felt better to just tell somebody who wouldn't personally be affected by what I was going through. And I could not have gotten through that time without that, you know, without that outlet. I felt like I kept calling it a pedicure for the brain, because I just felt like, you know, my brain needed it. And then I was relieved, and then I went 3 days, and then I saw her again. And that was a huge thing for me then too.
Those are great. Awesome examples. So we will kind of wrap it up here with this last question. It's really, and I understand it's probably complicated, but kind of a how-to question, right? You've talked about mindsets. social support, perspective and gratitude, processing, right? Like very, I think in many ways can be tangible things with strategies attached to them that you've sort of had to in many ways learn on the fly, right? Now that you've come through a lot of these experiences, what might be a piece of sort of like how-to advice for any of our listeners who are currently or recently or will eventually endure significant challenges just as you both have?
Well, to keep it as generalized as possible, because we all have different resources available to us, right? One thing I would say is if you have people around you, if you have a support system, allow them to support you. Rely on them for support. It's easy to kind of shut the door on people for various reasons, but I would say rely on those people that are around you and let them be there for you. I would also say that really reflect on what your values and beliefs are. What do you really believe is your purpose in the world, and what you think is key and critical to your successful ability to operate in your environment. And it could be as simple as complex as you want, but as long as you're in tune with that and can sort of reflect how you are maintaining those core values and beliefs through a challenge, I think you can really get through kind of anything. And then finally, I would say to, as we were just discussing, identify things that do help you to feel good, whether it's exercise or music or reading. I'm a big fan of TED Talks. Just find something that makes you feel good. And if you do those three things, I think you can, really find your way through whatever kinds of challenges you're faced with.
It's really excellent. I just want to double click on one of those things. There's plenty of good research out there. Adam Grant, Dr. Stephen Post, kind of in the organizational world, in the physical health world, in the well-being world, that suggests that giving generally, adding value to other people's lives, is tremendously beneficial, oftentimes for the giver and the receiver. But something you just pointed out there, which I think I can relate to a little bit, just sort of kind of growing up in the Midwest. I'm from West Michigan. There's sort of you don't necessarily want to receive help a lot of the time. There's sort of this independence and rugged individualism, sometimes like very community focused, but still on an individual level, you can have that. Well, how do you promote having more givers in the world? Like, you have to have some receivers. You have to be willing to, as you said, ask, right? And receive in some cases. And that's okay, because it also provides somebody else with an opportunity to do good things that make them feel good too.
The best example that I can, that hits the nail on the head for something that I feel like has changed my life and that I live by on a daily basis. And that is when I was in my mid-20s after I met Mike, I had a moment, a time period where I was struggling with strangers on the street approaching me in New York City because I was bald, and they, either wanted to say, do you have cancer? Or, did you shave your head? Or I just felt like people were...
Are you a lesbian?
Yeah. And it was a different time then.
Yeah.
But I was finding that very annoying. Like, oh, somebody's...
We're thinking we were two men.
Oh, yeah.
Ali lived in the West Village in New York when we met, which is, there's a pretty strong LBGTQ demographic there. And Ali and I would walk around, like this or whatever. And, we would get a lot of comments of people looking at us from behind, in that time period. And it was a first for me. So it was pretty interesting to experience that. But I was... that experience of being annoyed by being bothered, by being interrupted in my life and somebody coming over was tough for me. What I wasn't thinking about until Mike kind of made me realize it. But most of the time when somebody was approaching me, it was because they assumed that I had cancer, and they themselves either had been through cancer or had a relative or a close friend who had just struggled or was struggling currently with cancer. And I think that the approach was 100% not about me. When they approached me, it wasn't about me at all. It was 100% about them and them wanting to connect. And I was, saying something to Mike at one point about how it was just so hard. And I just remember him looking me in the eyes and saying, Ali, you need to turn that around, because
if you choose not to wear a wig, this is going to happen to you your whole life. And if you're annoyed every time somebody approaches you, that's going to be a hard way to live life. But if instead you think of it as, oh, wow, this is a moment where somebody needs to connect or vent or, relay a story or feel support. If you just think of it as, this is a moment where you're here to give, and they need to give they need to do what they need to do. That
You're
will
both
be
a giver and receiver.
right. We're both givers and receivers. And I was like, oh my goodness, like that just changed my life. I mean, I really remember thinking, oh my gosh, that changed my life, because it was just such a flip. I have never, ever been annoyed, truly, ever again since that moment, because I always feel like it's just about the other person. And I feel like, it's good for them to have that moment, and it's good for me to be the listener. And so it's just been, that's huge. That's a huge change in my life.
She doesn't know it. I just used my telepathic superhero power. I didn't do anything.
Whatever the cause, I was just going to say, there's that framing again, right? Just a shift in how you're looking at things.
The other thing I was going to say, just as, any how-to comments are, I've learned a lot about being vulnerable, that it's okay to be real. When you're in middle school or high school, you're struggling with different things in life, or you're facing different things in life. And sometimes you want to be like everybody else, or you want to have X and you have Y, whatever it is. But to be yourself and to, find people to find people that you can really trust with, just being vulnerable is a huge, I think it's a huge benefit on your well-being, because to do anything but that, which I think is the natural way for a lot of people, a lot of people were raised to kind of, everything's great. But if you can really kind of let that go, I think it's a lot easier to move through life and to face struggle.
Yeah, well said. Ali, Mike, this was a really wonderful conversation. I'm so glad we were able to make this happen. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was fascinating, difficult, obviously, but highly enlightening, illustrative as well. Where can people find you? Where can people interact with you? I know you do some nonprofit work. Can people, find a website and support that? Can they support, the school, Mike?
Well, it's interesting. We had started a venture called Be You Love Life to try to share all of this information. And at the time we were developing that, I was in another master's degree program while working and running a pretty intensive program full time. And we had one child and another one on the way. And the ability for us to also launch this Be You Love Life initiative was really compromised. So that has been sort of put on hold, maybe indefinitely and maybe not. I don't know. But I will say, supporting the work I'm doing in my school is obviously, other than my family, the most important aspect of my life. Our school's website is www.gncufsd.org. So that's Greenburgh North Castle Union Free School District.org. And there is a link to a donation page on there. We have a nonprofit called Stand with GNC, and we provide teacher grants. We've delivered over 400 computers to our students in the district in the last 11 months. We've provided roughly 10,000 meals for families. Our food services has created our own sort of like Blue Apron boxes where we say, okay, you have 5 members of your household. Here's all the ingredients for breakfast, lunch, and dinner and all the recipes for 7 days. And delivering those kinds of boxes to families, hats, gloves, coats. We're giving away students who are behaving and succeeding and thriving, flat screen TVs and AirPods and headphones and, all kinds of things, which has just changed the entire dynamic of our building because our kids didn't know that they were worthy and deserving of being recognized or provided for or rewarded for doing. So if people want to support our initiatives in the school district, again, it's www.gncufsd.org for Greenburgh North Castle Union Free School District.
That's perfect, and we'll make sure that link is in our show notes as well.
So
and also anybody can email me anytime at Ali Voron at mac.com. It's ALIVORON at mac.com, like Macintosh.
perfect. Yep.
I love when people reach out to me. I always respond. So anytime anybody wanted to connect, I would love to do that for whatever reason.
Beautiful. We'll put that in the show notes as well. Thank you both for that. So it was wonderful to have you both on, and thank you so much, and look forward to talking to you again, hopefully in the future.
That would be great.
Thanks so much, Nick. It was great to talk to you as well.
Great. Thank you.
Our show is produced by the Shipley School, an independent pre-K through grade 12 day school, rethinking education and daring to hope that we can, in fact, build a better future. Come on and join us.